You are listening to Torah Treasures, a messianic perspective on the weekly Torah portion, featuring Rabbi Jason Sobel.
This week's Torah portion is Parasha Vaera. In Exodus chapter 7, verse 20, we read the following: Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died, and the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. Why was the turning of the water into blood the first miracle that Moses performed? How is this sign connected with the first miracle that Yeshua performs in John chapter 2? Our sages offer many explanations as to why the first plague brought upon the Egyptians was dam, blood. The Nile River made Egypt a very fertile and prosperous nation. Since the Nile was the source of their sustenance, the Egyptians worshipped it as a deity. They personified the Nile as the god Hapi, to whom they offered sacrifices. The Egyptians also believed that Pharaoh, as God incarnate, was responsible for controlling and maintaining nature's harmony and equilibrium. Therefore, the Midrash states, why were the waters first smitten and with blood? Because Pharaoh and the Egyptians worshipped the Nile, and God said, I will smite their God first and then his people. Just as the common expression says, I will smite the gods and their priests will tremble. For it also says, the Lord will punish the host of heaven above, and after that, the kings of the earth below. Isaiah 24:21. And the fish that are in the river shall die. All 10 signs, and the first in particular, were meant to discredit the false gods of Egypt and Pharaoh's fallacious claim to govern creation. On the positive side, they were meant to convince all Egypt that the God of Israel really existed, that God had a special covenant relationship with the children of Israel, and that God is the creator and king of all. Another reason for turning the Nile into blood was to punish the Egyptians who had shed the blood of defenseless Jewish children by throwing them into the river, Exodus 1:22. Thus the blood of the slaughtered innocent babies cried out for justice from the depths of the Nile and bore witness against Egypt. Afflicting the Egyptians through this plague was particularly fitting, for it follows the principle of midah keneged midah, measure for measure. Based on both explanations, we learn that the 10 signs that God brought upon Egypt were both punitive and redemptive. By punishing Egypt for their transgression, God gave them the opportunity to turn from their sins and be spared like Nineveh. According to Deuteronomy 18:18, God would raise up a prophet like Moses from Israel to be their final redeemer. But what made Moses unique as a prophet? The Torah tells one key aspect was all those miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, Deuteronomy 34:11. It only makes sense that the first Mosaic-like sign that Yeshua performed involved the transformation of water into wine at the wedding in Cana of Galilee. Why did he specifically turn the water into wine and not blood? Wine is symbolic of the joy and redemption that the Messiah will bring about in the Messianic age. As we read in the Messianic promise contained in Genesis 49:9-12. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs, and the obedience of the nations is his. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. Thus Yeshua, as the prophet like Moses, publicly declared his messiahship by turning water into wine and not blood, because he did not come to bring death and judgment. Rather, he came that we might have life and have it more abundantly.